Imagine being surrounded by enemies in a foreign land, with no hope of escape or rescue. Imagine facing not only bullets and bombs, but also bitter cold and hunger. Imagine watching your comrades fall one by one, frozen to death or killed by the enemy. This was the fate of thousands of US soldiers in the Korean War, who were trapped in a deadly trap known as the Chosin Reservoir. The Korean War was a brutal conflict that lasted from 1950 to 1953, pitting the communist North Korea and its allies against the democratic South Korea and the United Nations forces. It was a war that saw many atrocities, casualties, and heroism on both sides. But perhaps one of the most harrowing episodes of the war was the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, where thousands of soldiers faced not only a fierce enemy, but also a deadly cold. In late November 1950, the US X-Corps, commanded by Major General Edward Almond, was advancing deep into North Korea, aiming to reach the Yalu River, the border with China. The X-Corps consisted of about 30,000 troops, mostly from the 1st Marine Division and the 7th Infantry Division. They were supported by air and naval forces and confident of victory. However, they were unaware that the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA, led by General Song Shilun, had secretly infiltrated the mountainous terrain around the Chosin Reservoir, a large artificial lake in the northeast of North Korea. The PVA had about 120,000 troops, and they were ordered by Chairman Mao Zedong to destroy the UN forces and drive them out of North Korea. On the night of November 27th, the PVA launched a surprise attack on the X-Corps, encircling them in the Chosin Reservoir area. The American troops were caught off guard and soon found themselves in a desperate fight for survival. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir lasted for 17 days, from November 27th to December 13th, 1950. It was one of the most brutal and bloody battles in the history of warfare, as the American and Chinese forces clashed in close-quarters combat, often resorting to bayonets, grenades, and fists. The battle was also a test of endurance, as the soldiers had to cope with the harsh winter conditions. The temperature dropped to as low as -35 degrees Celsius, and the wind chill made it even colder. The frozen ground made it difficult to dig foxholes or trenches, and the snow and ice made the roads and trails slippery and treacherous. The soldiers suffered from frostbite, hypothermia, dehydration, hunger, and exhaustion. Many of them lost fingers, toes, ears, or noses to the cold. Some of them froze to death in their sleep, or while waiting for evacuation. Some of them even used frozen corpses as sandbags or shields. The cold also affected the weapons and equipment of both sides. The rifles, machine guns, mortars, and artillery often jammed or malfunctioned due to the ice. The vehicles, tanks, and trucks often broke down or ran out of fuel. The medical supplies, food, and water were scarce or frozen. The communication lines were cut or disrupted. The air support was limited by the weather and the enemy anti-aircraft fire. Despite the overwhelming odds, the American troops did not give up. They fought back with courage and determination, inflicting heavy casualties on the Chinese. They also received some reinforcements and resupplies from the air and the sea, as well as from other UN units that tried to relieve them. They were led by Major General Oliver P. Smith, the commander of the 1st Marine Division, who famously said, "Retreat hell, we're not retreating, we're just advancing in another direction." The American troops decided to break out of the Chinese encirclement and withdraw to the port of Hungnam, where they could be evacuated by sea. They had to fight their way through a 70-mile gauntlet of enemy fire, ambushes, roadblocks, and mines. They had to carry their wounded and dead comrades, as well as their equipment and supplies. They had to blow up their vehicles and weapons that they could not take with them. They had to cross frozen rivers and steep hills, often under the cover of darkness. They had to endure constant attacks from the Chinese, who pursued them relentlessly. The breakout was a remarkable feat of military skill and willpower, as the American troops managed to reach Hungnam by December 13th, after 17 days of hell. They were evacuated by the US Navy, along with thousands of Korean refugees who had followed them. They left behind a devastated battlefield, littered with bodies, blood, and debris. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir was a turning point in the Korean War. It marked the end of the UN offensive into North Korea and the beginning of the stalemate that would last for the next 2 years. The battle had a high cost for both sides. The American forces suffered about 17,000 casualties, including 1,029 killed, 4,894 missing, 4,582 wounded, and 7,338 non-battle casualties. They also lost 15 tanks and many other vehicles and weapons. The Chinese forces suffered even more, with an estimated 60,000 casualties, including 7,304 killed, 14,062 wounded, and 30,732 non-battle casualties. They also lost many of their experienced and elite troops. The battle also had a lasting impact on the survivors, who became known as the Chosin Few or the Frozen Chosin. They formed a bond of brotherhood that transcended race, rank, or unit. They were honored and respected by their fellow soldiers and the public.